I've recently purchased a 2008 Infiniti QX56. This vehicle is quite the beast, having a large V8 engine under the hood and plenty of trunk space for whenever I need to buy things from my local hardware store. But as you might have noticed, this vehicle has been in a wreck and it looks like it's been hit in the left passenger door. This accident caused many issues to occur, which some of them make it very dangerous to drive. So in this video, we're going to attempt to fix all the major problems, so this can start being my daily driver. If you're new to the channel, then make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll leave a link for all the parts linked in the description, and let's get started. Looking at the reminder sticker, it says that the next oil change has to be done at 177,000 miles, and according to the odometer, it's time to do just that. Using car ramps can give you more clearance between the floor and the car, so you can more easily move your head around. Although getting both tires on the ramp at the same time can take a couple of tries, and I ended up having to drive down and adjust it little by little until both tires were sitting well. It doesn't hurt to put on gloves before an oil change, because this prevents you from constantly getting cuts and limits the exposure to used engine oil, which can cause cancer. I also lay myself down onto a rolling creeper, which as its name suggests is both good at rolling to get the next socket size, as well as just creeping under the car. Once the perfect socket is found, I can remove the oil plug. Well, that didn't work. I guess I have to try a longer ratchet, which will give me more leverage. Easy money. You know what's not that easy though? Predicting where the stream of oil is gonna land. What a mess. I'll definitely have to wash my arm because it got splashed with some oil. At this point, we can put back the oil plug. And according to Google, it needs about 25 foot-pounds of torque. And I'll do just that with a torque wrench, which makes a clicking sound when reaching the set amount of torque. Once that is done, I'll drag the oil pan right under the filter, which some people replace every second oil change, but because these things cost under $5, it doesn't hurt to have an extra layer of protection, especially since this engine is not new. Oil filters are usually able to come off by hand, but it's okay to take it off with a wrench, since you won't be needing it anymore. It's a good idea to add a little bit of oil to the rubber on the filter, which will make it easier to remove next time. There does exist wrenches for oil filters, but it's best to only use them for removing it and tighten it down with your hand when using a new one. I like wiping down the oil pan as well as around the filter, so for whatever reason if there is a leak, I shouldn't get confused from the leftovers of the previous oil change. At this point, I thought it would be a good idea to roll down the car from the ramps to make it easier when adding fresh oil. It's only afterwards that I noticed that there is no oil in the engine, and in case you didn't know, you should never run an engine without oil. Anyways, I'll start by pouring in a 5-quart bottle of 5W30, which is the manufacturer's recommendation for this vehicle, followed by another quart. I'll close the cap and turn on the engine to let the oil fill up the new filter. Thankfully, the engine didn't break, even though I ran it without oil and it started just fine. After running for 30 seconds, and since the engine needs 6.5 quarts of oil, I'll slowly add a little bit of oil at a time until I see that the oil level reaches in between the low mark and the high mark. I don't know if you can see this, but I ended up pouring the entire 7th quart to reach the center mark. And now that the oil change is done, I'll print out a reminder sticker to do an oil change in the next 5,000 miles. And I'm choosing to do it at 5,000 and not at 7,000, even though the manufacturer recommends it, because more frequent oil changes can extend the life from the engine, especially since it's been driven almost 200,000 miles. The next fix should be an easy one, which is basically one of the wiper nozzles that doesn't spray out the washer fluid. This is to be expected since this car hasn't been driven for almost 3 years. My plan is to force in some compressed air, which will hopefully unclog it. And just like that, I will now have both sides of my windshield crystal clear. When looking at the gauge clusters, we can see that the airbag light is blinking. And in case you didn't know, the airbag in a car minimizes injury when the car goes into an accident. So when it is blinking, there is a high chance of the airbag not employing when it should, which can be the difference between life and death. So what I'll do is test all the likely fuses to see if one of them has been popped, which can happen when a car goes into an accident. In this case, all the fuses were fine. While I've tested the car, I did realize that none of the controls on the steering wheel worked. This led me to believe that the clock spring is bad. The clock spring is basically a part which keeps all the electronics from the steering wheel connected to the car, and if this part goes bad, there's a chance for the airbag light to come on, since there is also an airbag mounted on the steering wheel and connected through the clock spring. To get to the broken clock spring, I'll have to remove the 2 bolts from the steering wheel which holds the airbag in place. It looks like I'll have to physically disconnect the airbag, so to be on the safe side, I'll disconnect the battery for a few minutes before doing that, because I don't want the airbag to go off. With a little help from a screwdriver, I can pry off the plastic clips holding the connectors in place. And just like that, I can place the airbag on the side so I can start disconnecting all the wires going to the steering wheel. A cordless impact driver makes easy work removing the bolts holding the steering wheel in place. When trying to remove the steering wheel, it puts up quite a fight, but it's better this way than having the wheel loose as soon as the bolt gets loosened. So when you're driving on the road, you should at least start feeling some play in the steering wheel before it can't steer anymore. Once I get deep enough, I'm able to remove the clock spring, which looks exactly like the new one. Perfect! I'll remove the blinker and wiper switch and transfer it to the new clock spring. I can then put back on the steering wheel, torque it down to spec, reinstall the airbag, reconnect the battery, and then give it a test. As I raise the volume, we can hear the static becoming louder. And it also appears that the radio tuner works as well. But what is most important is that the airbag light is not on anymore, which means we can put back all the plastics in place and bolt down the airbag. Now, even though the airbags are working, if we have a look at the rear tires, they appear to have little to no tread left, which can be especially dangerous to drive in either rainy or snowy conditions. So I got myself 2 new tires from eBay, which I immediately took over to my local tire shop. The guy will start by jacking up both tires, so we should be able to remove them. SUV tires like the one from the Infiniti are not light at all, weighing about 70 pounds per tire. Anyways, he starts by breaking the bead, which is basically separating the rubber from the rim. Since the tire bead is normally locked over the rim. This machine is also capable of removing the tire off the rim by prying out the bead little by little. Next, he will apply some tire grease onto the bead of the tire to make it easier to pop onto the rim. While the tires are being replaced, I also brought with a new set of air pressure sensors, which are mounted inside the tire, since a low tire pressure light was blinking, and when I tried checking the tire pressure through the display, none of the tires gave a reading. And after the guy removed the tire, it was certain why. You see, this part is the pressure sensor that is normally fixed in place through the valve stem, but here it's broken off and was just rolling around in the tire. And after he removes the old remnants of the sensor, he can then torque down the new sensor and then install the new tire. While the tire is being filled with air to seat the bead onto the rim, he'll program the new tire sensors, so the car should be able to read its data. With a little force on the tire, he got to successfully seal the entire bead.
What year?
2008.
After balancing the tire, it was installed onto the car, and I must say, he did an amazing job with replacing both rear tires along with all 4 sensors. And after driving a few minutes, let's see if the car can read the tire pressures. Amazing. After the accident happened, it seems like the left passenger wheel is slanted on an angle, which is the reason why the tire became flat on the side, while the other still had some tread left. This can come from a number of problems, but the one I leaned most on was that the wheel bearing is bad. This is because the ABS sensor light is lit, and if you didn't know, the ABS sensor is mounted inside the wheel hub. So if the bearing goes bad, it can sometimes take the ABS sensor with itself. To get to the wheel hub, I started by jacking up the car and remove the tire. I'll then unbolt the brake caliper, which will allow me to get the brake rotor out of the way. The big nut in the center keeps the drive shaft in place, so the hub should be able to come out. I also removed the old parking brake shoes, since they have no material left, and just ordered new ones. And after lots of hard labor, I managed to remove the 4 bolts holding the hub in place. If we have a closer look at the hub, we can see a large amount of play in the bearing, which is never a good thing. So what I did next was get myself a new wheel hub, which will replace the broken one. And here you can see it includes a new ABS sensor, so we're good to go. Now all we have to do is torque down the axle nut and install the tire. I'll also plug in my wireless OBD reader to clear the codes. And after it is clear, we can see that all the codes that are left is steering angle sensor, which can cause these 3 codes to appear, but I won't mess with that for now. And there is also a height adjustment code, which is caused by an issue with the air suspension. Normally this wouldn't bother me, but when I tried to pick up a few hundred pounds of material from my local hardware store, the suspension bottomed out on both rear tires, which is not only bad for the frame of the car, but is also very uncomfortable when driving over bumps, and causes the entire car to swerve a little. So what I did next was buy a replacement air compressor, because the old one looked like it was in very bad shape. I'll remove the 4 bolts holding the compressor in place, and I'm being very careful not to round the bolts. I remove the air outlet connections last, so I can match it with the new connections. But it did not hold. I thought that maybe cutting the tube a little will allow the quick connects to grip the air line. But that also didn't work. So an idea occurred to me. What if we just swap the old part onto the new compressor? Because the old part was able to grip the lines. Surely this won't be too hard, right? I'll go get the angle grinder. I really don't want to crack this cheap plastic. And we got it out. But will it be compatible with the new compressor? Fits like a glove. Prepping the mounting holes with WD-40 can prevent bolt stripping nightmares. I'll hand tighten the bolts and then finish it off with my cordless impact driver. At this point, we can reconnect the power wires as well as the air lines, and then the exhaust port, which is used for releasing air so the airbags can deflate. If we have a closer look at the airbag, lo and behold, the airbag is ripped. The new pairs I got are just like the old ones, having both an airbag for adjusting the height as well as shock absorbers, which also goes bad over time. I'll start by removing the air hose and then remove the bolts holding it in place. Now the top bolt gave me a little bit of a hard time with the impact driver, so I had to use heat. If you don't know how this works, in a nutshell, we are basically heating up the nut on the other side, which makes it expand, giving the bolt some extra wiggle room, so if rust forms over time, or if there is some Loctite, the heat will soften it. I didn't realize that my arm was in the way, but just like that, the bolt can be removed. And what can also be removed is the airbag itself, and we can pop in the new one. Sorry for my arm again, but both bolts went in fine. And after doing the other side as well, we now don't have to worry anytime soon that the air suspension will fail. But while all said and done, does it even work? Let's head out and drive about the same speed where before the entire car rocked side to side. Here we go. It is definitely quieter. And if we have a side-by-side slow motion comparison, you can see how before it wasn't very smoothly handling the bump, but afterwards you can both hear and see how it's going over the same bump at the intersection, but it makes no noise and is staying balanced the whole time. Now for the interesting part. How can it handle heavy loads? If you remember from before, after just a few £100 of material, the suspension was so bottomed out that the wheel was almost touching the fender. For this test, I'll lay down some boxes of tiles and see if the air compressor will kick on. And after laying down a couple of boxes, the air compressor kicked on until the car reached its optimal height. And vice versa, if I remove the tiles, the compressor has a built-in valve which will remove the air from the airbag if the car goes beyond a certain height. Nice. Now about the aesthetics. For now I won't buy a new door since the cheapest one is going for about 5 Benjamins on eBay. So to improvise, I bought 2 slightly different gray spray paints and sprayed it on the door. The first one was a little too dark, but the second one looked like it had a chance to blend in. To prep the surface, I'll simply remove the rust using my rotary brush attached to my drill. And after shaking it well, time to apply the paint. I'm not an expert at painting, but I think it looks decent. There are also some scratches next to the window, as well as around the fuel door. I'll mask the window, as well as all the other places where I don't want the paint to go. The fuel door itself is a replacement, but there was only a darker shade of gray, so I'll blend it in with some paint. And once it's dry, I have to say that there's very little difference between the original paint and the one that I've added. It looks like I didn't add enough masking tape, but nothing a little alcohol can't fix. The final step for this vehicle, before it can become my daily driver, I have to renew the 3-year-old registration. After all the fixes we've done, the only lights left on the dash are the slip and VDC off light. those aren't so critical, but after a few minutes of waiting, unfortunately, we pass, and this will now be my new car. If you like this video, then make sure to hit that like button on your screen, and consider supporting me through Patreon so I can keep making interesting videos. And I will see you guys in the next video.